Okay, we are live now. Can you hear me, guys? Just check. Hello. Okay, good. Hi everyone. My name is Yaroslav Yanevich. I'm working as a technical artist in the Unigen company, and today's stream will be about how to assemble some outdoor scene, and I will show you how we are doing it in our engine and our editor. Okay. First of all, I'm already prepared some project, uh, and I will show you step by step how to uh, how to work with our components, with our um, editor and objects. Okay, let's start this project. You already can see some terrain. I'm was doing it for prepare for our stream, and here we have some high data, masks for details, and that's all. How we create terrain. First of all, you need to create simple object landscape terrain. It's just consists of two objects, landscape layer map inside, and object landscape terrain. Object landscape terrain collect all layer maps that you will use in your project. We are using now single layer map, and landscape layer map can consist of height data, albedo, and masks for your details. You can load your own maps from image format for your height maps and etc. But I will doing it manually using brush edit toolset. And now I will show you how to edit and correct some data on your terrain. Now we have three masks, four masks, but one mask didn't use for detail. It's mask 2. I used this mask for my trees placement. Okay, let's start to edit this mask. And I will show you how to set up these materials. For edit brush mode, we are selecting landscape layer map and activating this brush editor. Here we can choose some layer for editing, and now we are using height map for editing. For example, we can use it for creating some levels of for your terrain. You can build your height with brush tool. You can set up size using some custom alpha brush, and using different blend mode, additive or alpha blend. I will show you how it works. Let's use edit mode, additive alpha blend mode. Additive mode, what I want to do, I will add some slope area here. And you will see that its area growing with my clicking action on terrain. It's an additive mode. Alpha blend mode using for spread one value of height parameter. You can pick your height parameter to press Alt and left mouse button, and now you can see it's picking our parameter value, and just replace this area with data what I pick now, and we can blur some area. For the start, I want to add additional prop here. I want to add another building and correct my landscape terrain for this building. Let's add it here. I using Countryside add-on. It's already installed in my assets. I need to choose Countryside and choose houses small. Just pick some of this house like this. Okay, now we just need to drag and drop it on terrain. We can do it manually, but I recommended you to drop it by some special tool. Drop to ground, and you should see how it drops, because if you are using this arrayed by normal parameter, your object will be dropped on terrain with this position and rotation to local normals of your terrain. And if it will be house, for example, we should or not use this point oriented by normal, or manually correct some rotation if it goes to not realistic way. Okay, I just put it here, rotate in a parallel position to our road, and now I need to correct my mask of details for this object. Okay, activated it, brush tool set, and just erase some masks. I using just paintbrush tool, yeah, and I click Control key, hold Control key on keyboard, and use black color to draw on my layers. I need mask 1, it's a grass layer. I just delete grass around my building. Something like that, and now I need to add some road here, a little bit sand surface around my building. Okay, and now we are going to correct our vegetation mask for that I'm using for my trees. We can see your mask in a specific specific mode. We have helpers, landscape mask, and I can show you mask 2. Now it's a mask for my trees. Okay, I need to select mask 2 and use same technique using opposite color and draw black color here. Okay, now let's switch off our debug mode for mask and let's add here some fences, some props around building. I will use Countryside Add-on 2 for fences. As you can see, we have many types of fence structure, and I just select one and put it near building. It's set to center of bound to terrain, and I can drop to ground this object, and I need to rotate here this object in a parallel way to our house. Okay, now how we place this object around, how we will copy this object around our house. We can just do it manually, but it's not so fast. For this operation, I recommended you use our snap tool. Snap tools. We have snap to grid or bounding box, snap to angle rotation, snap to scale, and placing to binormal orientation from surface. Now we are using snap to grid and snap to angle rotation. It's activated by holding Shift and Z. It's a snap to grid, and holding Shift and X, press X to activate your rotation snap. I already set up my grid size. It's now about 4.7 meters. It's a long length size of my object here. And what I can do it now, I now can hold Shift and just drag it on the left side from for using Gizmo access, but you can do it in a keyboard. You can press Shift and hit arrow key button, left arrow key in this case. And I will rotate it from keyboard, but you can use your mouse. Just activate your snap to angle. It's already set up to 80 degrees, 90 degrees, sorry. Now rotate, switch off snap to grid, move it here, and keep to copy it with snapping. Okay. Okay, rotate it. Oops, sorry. Go back. Okay, now we have fence around our building, but we have same copy of our fences piece, and each copy has entrance, but we need only one segment to have entrance. How we can um, fast, how we can quick to replace it, quick way to replace. If you have another object, another nodes in your folder where you draw from this piece, you can replace it automatically by using Shift key, holding on your keyboard, and scrolling your mouse wheel. It will automatically replace your object. We can just change our building model. I just press Shift button and rotate my mouse wheel. Okay. Okay, for now we have some fences around our building, and let's add some another stuff, additional stuff. We have here some vehicle, maybe just this object. And I will open this fence area and add some dumpster, maybe, yes, like this. Why not? Okay, it's a quick setup, quick example how to manage your object inside your scene. You just using some variant of snapping tools, and just you can just quickly replace your object with a feature of Shift and scroll your mouse wheel. Okay, now let's show you. I show you what I prepared already. My buildings, static buildings. Here it's another part of our scene. It's fences and some stuff around, and let's show you some props, additional props. These props we are using from our countryside add-on, but some props here you can see it's our own photogrammetry objects from our projects. But maybe in some updates of add-ons you will have to access for this stuff, photogrammetry objects. Okay, let's add here some grass and trees. Here some trees and grass, and let's speak about how to set up these objects, how we can create it. Now my foliage object placed by mask on terrain, and I add some additional noise mask to build some irregular look for these props, this grass, for example, because our mask, as you remember, have not so detailed structure. If you will see on here, it's a grass. It's just big chunks of big pixels without some additional noise inside. How it works? Okay. First of all, let's try to set up our grass. In this scene, they have a free object that they created this grass look. I have two grass objects and one clutter object. Clutters we are using for scattering not only grass. You can scatter rocks and whatever you want. All kind of stuff you want to place on terrain, you can use clutter. The clutter object just copied your prepared mesh. Here it is, some our grass mesh with material on it. Materials set up here in surface. You just select surface and set up your material. Let's create some additional grass layer. For this grass, you should create just a simple object, create a clutter mesh. In dialog window, you should select what type of object you will use for this. Let's see, there is stays. Sorry, just forget. There it is. Okay, create clutter mesh. Grass vegetation, grass clusters. Yeah. FBX. We have two types of our grass object. Let's add some grass. Okay, we just see here how your object scattered in two-dimensional way. It's just not intersecting the terrain. For intersection with your terrain, you should put your clutter object inside your object landscape terrain as a child. And now it's intersected with your terrain. Now you can set up your density, size, steps. Okay, increase density more. And you should set up material for it. I will just copy this material from my surface. I just select surface material, copy parameters and set it, paste it here by surface name or sequential. It depends of how your assets stay in this hierarchy. If you're sure that order of your surface is correct, you can just put your parameters by sequential. Or if you know that name of the surface correct, you can drop it by surface name. Okay, I just hide it. It's my additional grass. I will add some more density. And it's this object now cover all whole surface without taking some masks here. How to manage our mask? How to set it to effect on my mesh clutter? It's pretty easy. You just drop your object as a child to object landscape terrain, and now you just choose your terrain mask. We just need mask 1, and now we just added grass on terrain and set it to mask 1. Now it's here. How it looks like in our setup. We have 3 objects. We have grass clutter, grass main bear. It's it's an object for far side of our grass, for making some slightly transition for our grass to terrain. You can see this, and we have grass object main. It's grass in close distance to your camera. Let's see some parameters here. We have here additional mask. You can create your own mask or edit your mask from editor, some third-party editor. And you can draw here by this mask. I can try to draw some here. Just for example, I don't need this this area to be with grass. I can do it on my mask image or on my terrain mask. Let's correct it on my terrain mask. Try it. Mask 1. Hit Control. Just yeah. It's mask 1. Sometimes this needs to be updated manually. Let's try to. Okay, let's debug. Yeah. Okay, I know. I just need to reopen my scene. Yeah, it's not here anymore. And let's try to add some additional vegetation for our composition. Let's try to add some foliage, some trees. Now you will see trees on far distance, and in close way you see some detailed model. It's a polygonal model, but if you will go far away, you will see some low detailed object, and it's not just a load, it's imposter object. Imposter has his own texture set and loaded to your angle to camera. We can bake imposters for objects in our editor, and let's try to do it. We just need to add some object on scene. Let's add here this object. It's already set up and it has his own imposter, but we will create our own. And if you want to check how it's set up, you should dive in your node reference object. Now it's a node reference. You can click edit button, and now you will see what's going on inside. And here we have object mesh, and we have imposter. It's just imposter billboard mode, but we will use in imposter grass mode. Now we're interested in our object. He has some surfaces with a visible distance. As you can see, we are using visible distance maximum for, and it's set it to 5 meters, and it says about we see high detailed zero load only on 5 meters. If we are move further 5 meters, we will show our imposter or load 1. Yes, load 1 to maximum to 50 meters setup, and after 50 meters we will see our imposter because it's set it to maybe 5. Okay. How to create our clutter object? We just do it. It's like in a grass way. Create clutter mesh, and we just need to choose a mesh from this object. Vegetation, X. Sorry, I need to check. Let's see there. Here, okay. Create clutter mesh. X, remove 01C. Okay. We have this mesh here, and this mesh have no some setups. It's just render all his surface inside. And now we should copy our parameters from our object. Just select object, select our surfaces, and click copy parameters. And go to our object mesh clutter, select surface here, and pass parameters or sequentially or surface name. Now here we have our clutter mesh object, scattered our model for model of tree, but we have no here our imposters. We just see only mesh. How to bake imposters? We just select object what you want to bake, and now it's an object mesh clutter, and we just need to use a tool, main menu tool, imposters creator. Here it is some parameters. We'll need albedo, normals, shading, translucence, and depth map. It's already set it to bake vegetation. For normals and translucence, we should choose for vegetation point for vegetation mode. And now we should set up our resolution and baking process parameters. Resolution will be 4K, 8K, sorry. Phi and theta, it's the main parameters to collect our set of shots. Phi, it's how many shots you will create around your object. It's 32, and theta it's um, number of your textures to vertically. It's a rotation angle. We just will use 1 theta because we no need to step above of your vegetation. We just will see it from the ground. Aspect ratio 1 because we have some square type tree, not tall one, and hit create. Now we must set a folder for our imposter. I will select temp data folder already created for testing and create folder test imposter 2, and you should set name for your imposter material and textures. 01C quarter imposter. Okay, create. Just waiting. And now we have our new vegetation. Okay, now we see whole area of your clutter, but you didn't set up yet your distance visibility for imposters. And now we see and imposters and mesh together. Let's set up our imposter visibility. We just need to check how long we will see, how far we will see our mesh object. It's 15 meters max visibility. And now we should set to imposters. It has one surface. Set your mean visibility to 15. Maybe some fade. Add some fade. Okay, and now we just see in a close way we see mesh object, and far away we see our imposter textures. It's how it works separately. Okay, let's set it to normal way to our composition, because now it's just a square area with levitating trees. Let's move it something here, somewhere here in center of our composition, and just change size of this clutter, and after that clutter will automatically generate trees on new size. We have edit size button, we have gizmo here. I want to add my new trees somewhere here. I can manually to correct my size of this clutter, and here I will set it to 400 to 400. And now you should remember about your imposter, because it's now not correct size, have not correct size. You need to set it like in your clutter object, just here, and you need to make sure your position parameters have 0 values, because how we can make sure this object in the center of parent object. Okay. Now they stays in correct positions. Now I here can check it, and let's drag and drop our object in our object landscape terrain for collision. Okay, and let's set masks for this setup. Let's select object mesh clutter first and set mask terrain to 1, or no, to mask 2. Yeah, and let's set it to imposter. Imposter has grass parameter functions, but we are using first one texture set to mask 2. Okay, now we had additional foliage in our scene. It's accidentally generated here, but we can regenerate our vegetation. Just change our seed parameters. If you don't want change another parameters, just click randomize. Oh, sorry, it's an it's my just simple mesh object. I'm sorry. Let's hide it. Okay, if you change your seed parameter in your mesh clutter object, you just make sure that you have same seed parameter in your imposter for correct position of your imposter instance. And we can add some more variation to height of your object. Let's set up height parameters, min scale, max scale. The scale of our object, let's set it to 0.5 to 0.8, and adding some spread parameters, 0.2, 0.3 maybe. Let's decrease our density a bit, maybe like that. Make sure you set same parameters in your imposter too. Density is 0.025, and min height and max height. In imposter you will have parameters min height instead of min and max scale in a mesh clutter. 0.5, 0.8, 0.5, 0.8, 0.2, 0.3 to spread. Okay, now it has some oh, 0.03, sorry, 0.2. Okay, let's set it here. Now we have correct transition from our model to our imposter. And you can add some additional mask for mask image using mask image parameter, but now I will state like this and switch back my vegetation group on. Okay, I have bigger trees and smaller I added now, just now. We have some bushes here, and it's same setup for using your clutter mesh. And let's add some water here. Now we have a lake area. I just sculpted it with my brush tool. You can just select height map and draw some height parameters. Just set blend mode to additive and set up your initial height value, maybe 0.5. You can add some it's working like this. Okay, let's add some water. For this scene setup, we can use our global water. We have mesh, local mesh water, but for this type of setup, when you have one lower area with some lakes inside, some lake inside or water, I recommended using global water because it has more more modern shading way. They have more realistic shaders with tessellation. I already added here object water global. You can move it in distance. It has a global water area. It's rendered to infinite position, but now I set it here. Something like this, and it's setting up inside material of this object. You just need to scroll down to material, and now here I have material already set up for this look of water, but you may have just simple global material, base material, and if you will have here material, it will look like this. Not like a lake look, it's like a big water area. But for editing these parameters and all materials working like this, they have, when they create just sample of object in scene, we just have assign it to the object base material, and it has no editable values. But for creating, for changing these parameters, you should create instance of this object, this material. And now you can see in our material hierarchy, you just have base water global material and some already prepared setup for our scene. Now we are using global buffered 0. Let's say show you how it looks, but with some changes. it's a 0 before, but it has wide liquid area, leak of water, and it has some, not listing in this situation, some caustic effects, but I already set up it here. You can change these parameters. All green highlighted parameters speak about these parameters was different instead of your global base material. We just correct here tessellation and some wave animation parameters for more lake look-like way. For example, we have some shoreline wetness. That transition, we can do it more noticeable. Can do it more wider and offset it. Here. Okay. How to set up our clouds? We have no clouds here. For adding clouds, you just need to create your new sky cloud layer. We have some type of clouds. We have sky, object sky, and cloud layers. Let's hit to cloud layer and create and put it somewhere in your scene. And now your cloud will be really close. I have some question. Okay, I have some question here. Oh, let's quick answer on the question. If you choose the mask to do, you need to increase the clutter. Do you need to increase the clutter mask automatically scaled to clutter size? If you are, or if you mean your mask on terrain or in image mask. If it's an image mask, it's automatically scaled to your whole value of your whole size of your clutter object. If you're using your terrain mask, it's not scaling, it stays on terrain, there it is, and you just move your clutter and have new position of your object, because you just change your position of your square of clutter, but not moving mask. If you need somewhere more details or some new detail layer, you just create new mask and set it to clutter. I think lowest load is polyplanes. No, we have here some load, but it's not so low poly. I can show you on my simple object. Let's see here. Let's show some wireframe. Oh, I pinned my parameters. Sorry. Zero load for our leaves, and here we have some low poly, but it's not so low. As you can see, it's a polygonal mesh. But for our low poly that you can see on outside, we are using imposters instead of creating some additional loads. We just turn it off completely on 15 meters. And here we just see our imposter object. It's just a texture on a square plane. At this plane, rotate to your camera and just change your imposter texture from texture set. I can show you quick how it looks. You will see it's just a line of your tree for different angles. Okay, next question. There is an option or possibility to having terrain out a level to object place on the ground in this part of script. Terrain of the level to objects place on the ground. It's designed this functionality, but sometimes it's not dropping immediately, and you will need to re-enable your object or reload your scene. But I think in the future update we will fix it. It should work, but sometimes it's not working how we want to. You can use script for enable and disable objects, for example, but in a good way it should work by itself. How do you lower trees to terrain? Yes, I'm lower trees, so on terrain is just make my object that I want to lay on the terrain. I just make it like a child to my object landscape terrain, and my clutter and grass object can to move his instances to intersect with terrain and move it down. It just works automatically. You just need to set it here. Your parent object should be object landscape terrain, and your child object should be your clutter or grass object. It will work. But of course, if you switch off your intersection for your objects clutter or imposter, it's will not intersect with your terrain and will not to move down on terrain. Okay. If I want to cover 1 kilometer to 1 kilometer of vegetation, do you recommend it one mesh clutter? Yes, it's work pretty well. Now we have 5 to 5 kilometers, and I have clutter, but clutter for 400. Yes, you can surely make this mesh clutter size. It depends of your density and another parameter of your clutter. It's not size depends limitation. But for most of terrains what we are creating already, they have some similar to 2 kilometers of size of your trees clutter, maybe 2.5. But you should make sure you set up your correct step and density parameters, because it's affecting your generating this instance, because steps and density will will have will affect on your will make effect on your performance in the project. You should try some variants of more steps or low density, or more density and low steps. There is I have no day-night cycle build because it's should have some logic inside. I just can rotate my light manually now. It's a main light. It's dynamic as well, but we can now change our day-night cycle in a resulting project. I just turn it manually. You need logic for rotation your sun and switch on and switch off some voxel and environment probes if you're using it. Okay, let's continue our setup. We are stopped on our cloud setup, and when I created cloud, I put it on the ground, and my volumetric object start to reproduce not cloud. It's a big fog volume. We just need to put it some higher. Let's put it on 1.5 kilometers. I think will be more looks like clouds. And now you can see we are having some troubles with straight cut off distance of our clouds. We have two parameters that can make this result. First parameter, you should check your far distance clipping planes position. You need to set it way far, not to 10 kilometers, maybe 20 for from a ground look. But you can see we still have some cutoff effect, but second parameter that will take effect on this, it's main settings tab, and we should set up our environment settings. We need to set up our haze distance. Haze now cut off our clouds too, and we should set it to 20 kilometers and set up our density if you want to see it. Now it's looking more realistic, but we just have a simple cloud. It looks a little bit boring, and we have some already prepared setup in more realistic type of clouds. Let's find some cloud-based material, and here you can see we have some autocumulus, cumulus, nimbus stratus, stratocumulus, and stratus type of clouds. It's a terminology of science, I think. We just need stratocumulus. I like it, how it looks. And if you need more layers to your cloud, you just can create more layers than one instead of one that we are using now. We just can create new one or duplicate our already created layer and move it on another height value, maybe 3 kilometers. Sorry, not so. Yeah, 3 kilometers, and change its material to some stratus maybe, or the cumulus. Okay, and now bring back our first copy, and now we have some setup of 2 layers of our clouds. Clouds has its own shadow, and they are dropping on ground. If you will hide your cloud, you will see a slight difference your lighting in the scene. But if you add more clouds, you will see how it affecting on your scene lighting. Let's rotate so a little bit. Okay. It's how it works with our cloud. It was. Let's speak about some lighting setup. Now we are using dynamic lighting with our one object, light object. It's sun object, light sun, and we have some dynamic environment creation. We have these presets. Now we have preset 0, and it has his own base texture to create a dynamic environment and sun color. Here we have haze parameters, distance, and density. And we can create some presets for different weather condition. For example, we have preset 1, and we can just create this look by dragging your intensity level to 1. You just overlap our preset 0 and have preset 1. It has his own base, Mia, and light color texture, and now we have completely different look for our scene. Now it's look like Stalker or something like this. Okay. As you can see, your object in this scene has some reflections, but they are reflected now some not some correct not in some correct way, but we can correct our local reflection, because now it's a reflection from our base environment texture. How to add some local reflections? We are just using 2 types of object for this. It's create lights, some type of lights objects for specular, and some type of probes for collecting your light and reflection image. Now I'm using tool probe, environment probe in scene. They are switch off now, but let's take it on. Here I have a local environment probe for reflections. Environment probe for reflection to improve my reflection of water, because if you will switch off, you will have some artifacts of SSR, and will have no more detail on your reflection, because you are see here two effects, and screen space reflection and reflection of your cube map, but your cube map is not so detailed as you want. Here base map. Okay. Our lake environment prop has textures like a cube map. It has its own texture, bake it in a texture file in assets, and it's represent to reflect of your scene in this position, because it's set to local space. It has parameter here. Yeah, it's a local space parameter. It tried to represent, reproject your reflections to this sphere, and set it to reflection of your object. All reflected object in this area will take effect from your voxel probe. And I have global voxel probe, because we have many other reflected objects like greenhouses, and our object in the scene have some specular level and reflection level. And for correct reflections, we should bake another environment probe, and I create big environment probe. It's set to center of your scene. You can set it maybe here, and this probe have no limitation to distance. It's trying to see all that you can see from your camera, and pick it to texture. We can set it to dynamic for test, and now you can see how it change your reflection in this object. You can see it. If I switch off, we are starting to reflect our cube map. If we switch it on, it starts to reflect some of object in your scene. Let's bake it to on this texture. Okay. What else to show you here? Oh, okay. Just forgot about some particle system. We want to. We have suggestion to put some fireplace on our scene, our composition, and I have already created fireplace from VFX add-on. I just put it here. fireplace. Okay, no, sorry. Yeah, here, and let's take a look how it works and what it consists from. And I can move my sun a little bit on position, and now you can see some lighting here from object, but it's just point light that stays here inside of your fireplace reference node. It's just a node reference object. If we dive inside, we just can see what it's look like. Now let me show you. It looks like fireplace, but now it's just a particle system effects, meshes, and some decal to create dark area around fireplace. And we have some OmniLight for imitating your lighting. For imitating light and some specular effect. You can see here some specular. It's from our OmniLight object. Okay, how to create it? They have. I will switch off all objects and we'll show you step by step. First of all, we are creating some place. It's just a mesh, just an object. It's a photogrammetry of wood, piece of wood. I just put it like this, and I have some particle system set up here. I move it a little bit up. Let's show you how it looks like. Okay. First of all, I have low fire area. It's area of some small flames on the ground. It's just a simple particle system that are rendering flat particles. It's just a type of flat. It's named flat particles. As you can see, if I set up to billboard, it will be follow my camera and looks on the camera angle. But here I need flat, and I have some different points of imitating of these particles. It's working with dynamic emitter called cylinder, and we have some size of cylinder, X and Y size. And I can move it further, and we have some bigger area for emitting these particles. Second, it's a low fire. It's just a body of your fireplace. Just particle system with two particle systems with same parameters, and they have one force that just tried to sync up in the center of force your particles. Let me show you this gizmo. It's this force in the center, and it has a attractor parameter and attenuation. You can move it inside or outside of center of this force. Okay, now we have sparks. Sparks is just particles. It's on one spark we have one particle. Here, I just stopped my animation inside the editor. Just press Control and spacebar. And now here we have set up for sparks. Sparks have a type of meter length particles, type of particles length. It's mean that you can stretch your particles through your velocity direction. It has length stretch parameter, and you can add some more look like it's stretched sparks. Some interesting way. They are moving on the noise force. They have noise force. They have some spread to direction on X and Y, and they have no spread to direction Z, and have only one straight direction to up, and some a little bit spread to left and right. And plus they have noise setup. You can't see noise, but it's here. I can try to change some scale, for example, and you will have some different animation of your noise. Okay, and we have Glowfire. We have yes, we have Glowfire. It's just additional particle system for imitating some glow. You can use it or not. It's your own choice. But for me, it's adding some additional details to your effect, but maybe not so big. We just can to resize radius of our particles. Initial radius maybe to 4 or something. Yep. And create more particles and spawn rate to 12 maybe. Okay. And we have fire smoke. It's just a simple smoke simulation, but now we have more advanced rendering feature for our particle system, and in next update you can just work with it. I can show you on our art samples. I can show you how it looks like now if you want. I can show you how it looks our new system, our new rendering feature of this. Let me show you how it looks like. Take a second. Okay, let's open. I can open my template particles scene, for example. Yeah, what's going on? Why didn't see anything? Oops. No. Let's move to our assets. Yeah. Particles. Visit effect. Yes, it's now you can see it's a new particle shading. You can see shadows. You can see some transparent effect. Normals here. Let's say show you smoke. Yeah. It's smoke. It has some parameters in material. They have some improvements in our parameters. Now we have now we can able to edit from curve editor some range of values set up from curve, and now we have additional parameters to additional features to shading our particles. Now we can add normal map, and you can see how it works. And it works with particles, and particle can take effect from our source of lighting objects. You can see we have more accurate shadows, and we have now shadows on particles and through from particles. It's a great shadow. Now we have motion vectors, but let's show you here maybe. Yes, we have now motion vectors, and if you switch off this motion vector, you will see how to jagginess of this animation, because we have no enough frames. And now we can slightly smooth it through our motion vector. It's work, but it has only 4-on-4 flipbook here, and you can take less your video memory for particle effects, just using a motion vector to smooth your animation. Okay, it's about new shading features in particles. Let's look a little bit not so cool. Okay. Maybe you have some questions about particles or lighting. I will answer. I have no VR setup, but we can click play and see how it looks in the play mode, because we have C# components for this. It's our building, what we added here. I have no collision now, but It's easy to set up. Yes, it worked well. And they have underwater surface because we are using global water. We no need to set up it from logic. I remember what I want to show you. I want to show how to set up your detail on terrain. Yes, it's a C# component project. Yeah, it looks like a stalker in the game. It's very similar because it's our small village looks like stalker, or maybe um, some Arma Days mode without zombie, of course, but we have lags on stream. Oh, sorry, but I have no how we can fix it. Yeah, I see some, like maybe it's because I use my project and it's drained or all performance for stream. Let me check some question. Whether you just add your particles here and just rain maybe. We have weather add-on with some built-in setups, but you can create it in your own way. It's not so difficult. You just need to figure out what exactly weather is. You just need to set up your lighting and maybe some fog effect, maybe some rain. It's just particles. We can use it from VFX add-on, I think. Let's try to set some raindrops node. Here they have some raindrops. It's just maybe it's bigger than should be for this project. Yeah, let's take it smaller. Reduce 0.1 and create it more dense. Spawn rate to something like this, and change your settings to something like this. Maybe rotate your sun a little bit and change raindrop material setup. Environment and change parameter to strength, length, stretch. You need some type of rain here. It's like a variant. We can create some big decal here to create effect of wetness of surface. But you create your detail to take your that effect on here. We can make it like this. We have material roughness, and some puddles. And the road material to set it to roughness 2. And some ground material. It looks like leather, but you should switch it in some way using some code. You just prepare your materials or parameters for some condition of weather and switch it from logic, and it will work like weather preset. Yeah, it's was a little bit radioactive because it has more multiplication value in the environment. Let's start to glowing. Okay. What else to say? We have some parameters to some question about optimization you've seen. For this scene, I didn't do so much optimization work, but I can bring you a simple list of your points to you should make sure that you know about. First of all, it's your first point. It was your lighting and okay, rain stop. Your lighting and shadows. We have so many geometry here, so much geometry, and they all cast shadows, and it's drain your vertex count, and it's can be twice or maybe 4 times of your polygonal mesh in your scene. And for this reason, I recommended to make some tricks with shadows. Don't use shadows on all your geometry. For example, you can make some load for your tree and just render from a load polygon shadows, not from only all polygons. But you can create, you can use screen space effect. It's just a screen space shadow. Now we have it here. If you can see, we here have some shadows, but it's not a real shadow. It's just a screen space effect. Let me show you how it works. Let's take a sun and switch off our shadow first. I switch off shadows, but I still have shadows. I switch off my screen space shadow. Now I have no shadow. and you will have how it to take effect on your image. Let's switch on screen space effect. It looks in the distance, it looks like a shadow, proper shadow. You can see, but it's just a screen space effect, and it will help you to take some performance to another effect, not only on shadow casting, and just create shadow. What I want to say, all this grass has only screen space shadow, and some bushes to have only screen space shadow. These bushes, its surface that I select, they cast wall shadow off. If I hit on, I have more shadowing, but I have less performance. And I using here only screen space effect. This effect using for all geometry on your screen. It's not object by object. It's have no by object setup. It's just on or off on your light source. You just can on or off your light source, creating screen space shadow. But you can tweak it in these settings. You have some type of ray trace in screen space, and you have a number of rays, steps, and some noises to fix some artifacts if you have no if you cannot use a big number of steps, for example. I can show you how it works. I just switch off my shadow and just stay only screen space shadow. If you are increasing your number of steps, you have more long shadow ray cast, but you have more performance drain for this, and you have number of rays. How many rays you will trace on the screen. It's a screen space effect, and you will see if you go to border of your screen, you will have some information lost here, and our shadow will disappear. But it's how it works. You can render more than your viewport border. You can set up your render to rendering a little bit more, but it has performance drain too, because you have to render more screen. It's here, border width and border height. You can increase this border, and your physically your image will be rendered a little bit more than in your screen. Okay, what else for screen space? We have threshold, because we should cut off some rays that they go to object on a distance. You can see some projection of your shadows on the object. They are not staying in one in a close position, but you still have some shadows if you not threshold it. As you can see, they have shadow on the building. We should threshold it a little bit. course, you can change your step size in a good way that help you to make more smooth transition, smooth length of your screen space effect. Okay, it's so bright here. Let's put our clouds back. And for optimization, next step. First step was shadows. You can switch off your physical correct shadows and not produce it for some object. You can select object and in settings of surface you can just switch off cast of world shadow. It's a shadow from sun, or a cast from Omni and Progelight, and didn't cast it, and make it from screen space effect. What else about optimization? Next step, it's your transparent objects, because we here have so many objects with leaves, but of course we didn't use it like just a geometry, not using straight polygons. Here we just using triangles with some alpha map, but we are not recommending you using for transparent object alpha blend mode. We are using alpha test. It makes some straight border of your object, but it's okay for vegetation, because vegetation has no slightly gradient transition between transparent and opaque geometry. We just have clear border of what's transparent and what's not transparent. And alpha test geometry just rendering in a full different render, and it's working like just polygons, and it's work faster when you will use alpha test now. What else? Of course, you should make some loads for your object and not using some not necessary details if it's covered to another map, like displace or normal or albedo. Terrain optimization. For terrain, you have some parameters for increasing and decreasing your detail of tessellation, because now terrain has tessellated geometry, and you can set up your distance to tessellate it not so far if you don't need it in these hills. I just see some color, but I can't see some geometry details, and I can create some I can make some tweaks for tessellation. Okay, it's our landscape. We have geometry progression parameter that correct our tessellations. We have subpixel reduction parameter to reduce our details here. What else? For the first step, I think it's all, because some technical aspects you should make with some debug monitor or microprofiler, but now we are not have time to represent you our microprofile. We should make another stream for this, I guess. What else? Let's make Q&A if you want some more question. Can I animate vegetation or add wind effect? Yes, you can animate your vegetation object. It's just we have samples for this. I can show you here how it works. We have shader animation for geometry. Vegetation, parameters, materials, and animation. For example, it's a grass object. Okay, it's not so. Leaf animation, for example. I created this sample for example to how to animate object. You have some different channel, and if you want, you can set up your vertex color, and red channel will be your leaf animation. Your leaf should be red color, have red color, and all your branches and trunk should be black. Green channel should take effect, may take effect to your animation variants. All your separate branch of tree should have different color. It's not on the leaves. It's a whole branch with leaves on it. Have separate different green shade color. And blue channel should be this gradient from your trunk to your peak point of your branch, and it will take effect like this. For leaf animation, you just distorting your red area, maximum red. For green, your green. Different objects in different color have some variation of animation. It's only green object, one color, have same animation without some difference, and this object have separate animation step, blue color, etc. And this is bamboo tree. The bamboo is a banana tree animation in complex of 3 of this color. And here we have so many parameters. All these parameters you can see in material. Of course, you should activate your state for vegetation, and you can choose. You should choose animation parameter vegetation animation default and geometry UV based. It's all says in these samples how you can create proper UV for this animation. It's more complex way, but yes, you can animate as you want your object. Something like this, for example. And we have some separate parameters to billboard leaves. It's a leaf in geometry representation and billboard texture. Mesh leaves and vertex color animation you can choose for your animation. It's a more efficient way to set up your realistic animation for vegetation object. Okay, next. Border and quality screen borders. Okay. Let's dive in. We can switch to some of one screen space effect. Oh, I forgot about optimization in your post effect, because you have so many different screen space post effect going on here, and they are rendered in separate passes, and all these passes you can adjust and tweak. Resolution of your pass should be set up because your resolution take effect on your performance. Now I'm rendering my SSO in half resolution for best performance, but if you need some more quality in screen space and ambient occlusion mode, you can create this pass in a full resolution. You will have more details, but you will have slightly low performance. You can all this set up all these parameters. Okay, what about our borders? Let's set some maybe 15 or by 50 by 50 pixels. And now we have our information lost a little bit not so fast. Let's create some primitive sphere and set some parameter, some material here. It's a metallic sphere. And you will have information loss become not so fast now. As you can see, I have already take a border, but I still have reflection here. But if I change my border to 0 to 0, oh no, it's still rendering. I need find some position to SSR. roughness. Sphere, not so good object for this. Okay, let's see it on our SSO effect. You can see here shadow start to disappear because we didn't have information about this object here. And let's increase border 100 to 100, and you can see here shadows becomes bigger because they have here information about object in 100 pixels more. If I set to 0, I will have just more quicker and disappeared shadow. Okay. Sorry about getting output that project as a downloadable example. I think no, because I use not all of this object that I use is still in our add-ons. Because of that, I can't download it. But we maybe we can create some privacy correct version, and I will send it, but not now. Okay, guys, we have 2 hours. I think you are a little bit bored of my speaking technique. I'm sorry, I just tired a little bit. Hi host, make a shout out, thank you. I'd like to see in the future videos on character rigging, posing, animation, blending. We will try to make this video for you. Okay, thank you. Voxel light. Yes, I have here already baked voxel, but it's baked not so fast. It's like some difference besides of environment probe that is voxel just collect this information in 3D space. In each voxel point you have some little voxel probe. It's just a simple way to explain. But you can collect your reflection and lighting value in 3D space points. I already baked it here. I just switch off my sun, and here now you see a low density voxel information, lighting information in the voxels. It adds some additional shadows, and it's helped to make your object connect with another object in your scene. They are not levitating if you are using correct lighting. But it's just object, you put it on your scene, Set voxel size parameters. Now one voxel have 6 meter size. It's a big voxel, and you can't to collect small details. But if you want, you can create a smaller version of this voxel volume and make more detailed lighting. Okay, guys, I think we are done for this stream, and I hope I show you some interesting and useful approach to working with our engine. Um, okay, thank you guys, and bye. I will stop the stream. Thank you for coming.